Hello, everybody, and welcome back to artofdino.com and saveearth.us. And I've got another batch of little AI translations that I did a while back from an old German book from the 1700s or i700s. And it's pretty sweet. It's about the general history of America and before, and it has some interesting things that I've never really heard before. So I wanted to share them here. And again, this is one of those the part of my vast collection of random things that were going to get turned into videos, but the YouTube doesn't give me much motivation, and so I'll dribble these out as time goes on, and they'll be pretty cool. So you'll see what happens. These are just kind of random ones, but this book has some great artwork. It's got like the artwork going together with what we envision of early America there's something that is missing from our general understanding, and this book, I feel like it has something to do with it. And in general, the Germans, I always feel like were one of the last to get reset or something, probably because they fought pretty hard in that area, and I think that they hold some keys to some certain information. And again, I translated this with Google Translate, so again, take that into consideration. It's not like perfectly translated, I guess, but it seems pretty good. It seems pretty accurate. It doesn't seem to be many flubs and different things that you can usually tell when a translation goes wrong. So take a look at this. It's going to be pretty cool. I'm only doing about 5 pages here, and then I did a bunch of this book because I found a bunch of interesting things. And so if you guys end up liking this one, I'll end up sharing some of the other ones. So it's up to YouTube and the algorithm and you all to see if it's to convince me that it's worthy of putting in more effort. So I'm going to show you the pages here, and then I've got a bunch of different AI arts that are get the point across and envision America before, because there's some stuff here that's really interesting. And I start with page 43, and I'm going to start with he talks about the Lycians and all these different people, Caesar and things before this, and he connects them to America, which I think is definitely possible, and the Phoenicians as well, because masters of the sea are definitely going to be able to get across the Atlantic. It's disgusting to even think that the ancients couldn't do that when they were living in water and had mastery of boats and air and nautical things. So I'm going to start with this guy's opinion in the section of the origin of the American peoples from this very interesting book. So here we go. My opinion is therefore this, that the greater part of the American inhabitants are originally descended from the barbarians who both invaded solid Greece and whose islands they had. And when they had sent out many colonies from the original to all regions over several centuries, finally all or most of them were forced to leave the Americas and disperse to different countries, which is also very interesting. They were later given the support of the Cadmonians over Agenorides, who were considered to be the subjects of the tribes of the king of Og of Bashan, mentioned in the scriptures, had been driven out. This happened about the time when the Canaanites, who fled before the Hebrews and were forced to make a nuisance of them, began to flood like a raging torrent other countries where they encountered less terrible enemies. And this gives an impression of, not like a world like Christopher Columbus describes, where like absolutely nothing like that world. This world described in this is so much different. And when you connect the ancient Romans and that artwork and everything that was created there, and the magnanimousness of their just structure and stature, you get a better grip than just like there being feeble little like natives who don't know anything and have never done anything before except barely make fire. It's just totally wrong what we've been taught, and this gives a great impression, I feel, of the power that existed here, and of just a hint of what really was at that time that we've been lied about so much. It is clear from the writers that the barbarians occupied Greece even before those peoples who are known to us under the name of the Greeks. And again, are the barbarians Tartarians? A lot of things will make you think that, and probably is right. And although the historians, and especially the poets, have gradually given these teachers the names of these earlier barbarian peoples, the Greeks were nevertheless very different, and actually none other than the Agenorides, who from the land of Canaan brought the letters and perhaps the Greek Chinese language, which they introduced instead of the barbarian language. Tartarian, of which, as I will show later, almost not the slightest trace more exists. So again, boom, whenever the slightest trace, whenever someone can pinpoint that an entire language was eradicated, you know those were an important people. And again, it seems to be pointing towards the Tartarians. I think that this happened long before the building of the cities of Tar and Sidon, or at least before the attained splendor of these maritime cities, which became so flourishing through their trade, and which further established various colonies in Greece, Africa, and Spain. Although these barbarians have been confused with one another in history through a multitude of special names given to each small canton, they are nevertheless grouped together under the fairly general family names of Pelasgians, and Hellenians, which have passed on from a few special peoples to the whole nation. The Hellenians and Pelagians often mixed with each other, as is clear from history itself. The Pelasgians, however, differed from the Hellenes in that the latter, who devoted themselves a little to agriculture, were not so united and somewhat more settled than the former, who neither harvested nor reaped, but lived only on tree fruits, hunting, fishing, and what fortune gave them, who only lived in tents, set out for small reasons, and led a wandering life, both for state reasons and out of necessity. Sounds like the Tartarians, the nomads, but only the nomadic part of it. The advancement part is still kind of hidden. Those who are sufficiently familiar with the barbarous peoples of the North America will find in them the true nature of the Hellenes and Pilas. The one who bears the name of the Hurons cultivates the fields, erects huts, and remains for a considerable time in one place. On the contrary, the majority of the Algonquins and northern savages love a wandering way of life and live only on what fortune gives them. Almost the same difference will also be found among the peoples of the South America. And when they say live only on what fortune gives them, again, it reminds me of the Tibetans, the ones who kind of wander, and then when they find food, it's considered, the natural finding of food or the blessing of someone giving it to you is all part of that fortune, what they describe. Everything that I shall have to say in connection with the customs and habits of our savages has such a similarity to that which has been encountered among these barbarous peoples that, in my opinion, one can completely recognize the same in it. Before I go any further, I must first remove a prejudice. Many people might be surprised to see that in pursuing this work I have not only examined the customs of the younger Greeks, who organized their republic on the model of the ancient Cretans, but also the customs of the ancient Romans, the Iberians, and the Gauls. Keep in mind, France, the most advanced place we've seen in those early World's Fair days, was Gaul at one point, and that's where I'm sure the buildings and beauty came from, in order to find similarities in them which do not always seem to serve the purpose. But according to the testimony of historians, nothing was more similar than the customs of the Iberians, the Gauls, and the peoples of Thrace and Scythia. And again, there's been many things of Scythia in America and Tartaria, all connected, since these barbarians had spread from all the regions in question. Meanwhile, it seems to me that the Iroquois and Hurons are to be recognized in a very special way among these peoples of Asiatic Thrace, who penetrated into Pontus from the extreme ends of Asia Minor and even Lycia, and settled in Aria and Ariania. I shall also in due course give the reasons which can confirm my conjectures on this account. And again, you'll hear names of towns and places that we are dropped in history randomly or just forgotten in history. And that's the thing, there are so many amazing cities with really cool names that were just lost, destroyed, and devastated during some reset, some battle, some war. And so you hear a lot of that here, and it just conjures the imagination to just be like, oh, I wish we knew, because all you see here is in America is rubble, rocks, all different kinds of things that once were great. However, I once again subject all these conjectures to the scrutiny of every learned person, for I ask nothing more from my part than to compare, as far as possible, all the peculiarities of American customs with the customs of the early times. But first we must mention what even the savages believe about their origin. Now this is interesting. Nothing can be researched about the savages as to their origin. I wonder why. Opinion of the savages, for as they have no letters, they cannot point to any time or yearbook which is reliable. In the meantime, they have a kind of sacred tradition, their own, which they try to preserve with great care, but this tradition is insufficient to describe each particular people in such a way that they could all be traced back to a known origin, or it would have to be the very first origin of the whole human race, which being one of the most remarkable events, has left the deepest traces which can be found in almost all uncivilized peoples without exception. Moreover, as this tradition is passed on from mouth to mouth, it always undergoes some changes and degenerates into such absurd, which can be compared with each other with great difficulty. And again, that's where we are today. It has gotten so absurd because just ruler after ruler has changed and altered it. I'm convinced that nothing of the truth has survived, and we just have the things that we know, that we think we know, and we think these historians know, are but a tiniest of tiny things that they wanted us to know about. And the rest of the history, that the really important stuff, has all been shredded to dust. The Iroquois relate their origin and that of the earth in this way. In the beginning, they say, there were 6 men. The Peruvians and Brazilians agree with this number, 6 men. Where did these men come from? They do not know. At that time there was no earth, so they wandered about in the air. Likewise, they had no women, and they saw that their race would die out with them. At last, however, they learned, though I do not know how, probably mushrooms, that there was a woman in heaven. When they consulted among themselves, it was decided that one of them, called Hoguaho, or the wolf, should go up there. The undertaking seemed impossible, but the birds of the sky joined together and carried him up, making a sign of him with their bodies and supporting each other. Interesting. I wonder if that sign of him with their bodies is cross-related, or who knows. When he arrived there, he waited at the foot of a tree for the time when this woman would go out according to her custom and draw water from a well near where he was staying. The woman did not fail to show up as usual. The stranger who was waiting for her entered into a conversation with her and made her a gift of bear fat, which he gave her to eat. A virtuous woman who likes to enter into conversation and accepts gifts does not make victory doubtful for long. Now this woman, although she was in heaven, committed a weak act and allowed herself to be seduced. The Lord of heaven became aware of this, and full of anger chased her away and threw her down. But as she fell, she took the tortoise on her back, on which the otters and the fish built a small island out of clay, which they had taken from the depths of the sea, which gradually grew larger and took on the shape in which we still see our earth. This woman had 2 children who fought each other. They used different weapons, the strength of which they did not know. Those which one of them used were offensive, but the others could not do any harm, so he was soon killed. Interesting, very interesting creation myth. From this woman all other people have sprung through a long succession of generations, and this, they established, is all the more a special event, because she laid the foundation for the distinction between the 3 Iroquois and Huronian generations, namely the wolf, the bear, and the turtle. These are by means of theirs to regard their names as an indelible tradition, which always brings their history of the earliest times before their eyes. Although the ridiculous nature of this fable may cause pity, it is by no means as absurd as the fables invented by the otherwise clever Greeks about Prometheus's journey to heaven when he ascended to steal fire, or about the restoration of the world by Deucalion or Pirha, who followed the advice of the oracle, threw stones backwards over their heads, which then turned into a man and woman, since the difference in sex depended solely on the person who had thrown the stone. And again, now we have things like the Big Bang and evolution, just the extension of these nonsense fairy tales that, again, I am beginning to believe all stemmed from America, the birthplace of man. And again, we hear, oh, Africa is the birthplace, or blah, blah, blah. Anything they say, anything we think and know now, I have a feeling is wrong. And judging by the way they've treated America, how they took incredible lengths of efforts to absolutely eradicate a place that had such a clear and amazingly obvious history, and they just crushed it to dust. And so that makes me think that why they would have so much intention to put everything elsewhere, to distract everyone in the future by saying, oh, this is we just found this place but the cradle of civilization is over there, so don't worry about it here, don't even think about it being here. And this place is new, this place is fresh, it hasn't been around since the dawn of time or since the dawn of man, it's only 500 years old. Nonsense. So here we go, it keeps going. But as ridiculous as this fable is, or as all of them are, I believe that despite the thick darkness that surrounds it, the truth can be seen shining through. Certainly, if one looks a little deeper, one can see the woman in the earthly paradise, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the temptation to which she had the misfortune to succumb, which some have considered a sin of the flesh, perhaps basing it on the falsification of pagan images. One discovers in it the wrath of God, who drove the first parents out of the abode of pleasure in which he had placed them, in comparison with the rest of the earth, which was now to bear them nothing but thorns and thistles from its womb. This could well be considered the Hainunel. I'm not sure what that is. Finally, one can also see the death blow of Cain, which he committed against his brother Abel. And again, this leads more and more into all of that stuff in the Bible and everywhere else that we know today being just complete nonsense based on something that actually made sense at an earlier time, and has just been, again, shredded so much people believe it wholeheartedly, they believe it literally, and the old version, the true version, is gone. This fable also has its roots in the mythology of the ancients, where many things of which religion teaches us have become hidden rather than completely unknown. Nothing is in fact more similar to the Iroquois fable, which presents us with a woman expelled from heaven, than those which tell us 50 myrrh, I'm not sure what that is, about the fall of Ari. Ari, A-R-E, was a goddess and daughter of Jupiter. Her name already clearly shows that her disposition was very vicious. She was only concerned with causing evil. She was quite incapable of anything else and was hated by gods and men. Finally, she so angered Jupiter himself that he seized her by the hair and threw her down from heaven and swore that she would never set foot on it again. From this story of Homer, okay, that's what it is, Homer, it is easy to conclude that this poet wanted to represent the evil desires that drive us to evil, or perhaps even sin itself, in a flowery image. For after he has made a description of this evil woman who roams the earth with incomprehensible speed and inflicts every imaginable heartache on people, he adds that her sisters, also daughters of Jupiter, to whom he gives the name Dire, that is Jeberi, always follow her and try to make amends for the mischief she has caused. But they follow her very slowly, because they are lame and very deformed. In fact, even according to the concept of the pagans, prayers were one of the most powerful means of appeasing the wrath of the gods after a sin had been committed. The reason why Homer describes them so poorly is probably because few prayers are found who are not defective. Very interesting, and I do agree with the power of prayer in group people doing things, whether even if they're all praying towards something that is kind of wrong. They get that act is an ancient act, an ancient bodily function, and we still have the power in us today. Maybe not as much as we used to affect reality, but we still do definitely have the power in praying and thinking and hoping and wishing. Not Obama kind of hope, though. Get that nonsense out. Here we go. On page 47, Justin Martyr, in his exhortation to the Greeks, is not satisfied with this figurative explanation, but tries to assert that Homer has described by ATE the sin of the rebellious angels in the just punishment with which God punished them by expelling them from paradise forever and ever. Since this is for them a cause of an inextinguishable jealousy against men, to whom paradise is not closed forever by the grace of redemption, it causes them to lay incessant snares of evil for the destruction of the human race. That I think is a big hint of who ended up taking over from the original peoples. Someone from most likely beyond the poles. But because some people make a female character out of it, why should this fable not be interpreted as referring to the fall of Eve and the banishment of our first parents from the earthly paradise? Ar, or Acte, was a cry of joy of the Bacchanals. It was Evohe, if according to the assurance of Clementus Alexandrini, the Bacchantes, Evohe can be interpreted as referring to Eve, which I will mention in more detail in due course. And then Ar will also be the name by which Eve was indicated at the festivals of the barbarians, from whom this fable was sometimes taken. Again, sounds a lot. Evohe sounds a lot like Eve. The floating island, which was just there to receive the woman who had fallen from heaven, also has a great deal in common with the fable of Latone. The latter, being pursued by the serpent Python, and unable to escape anywhere, fled from the Hyperborean lands in the form of a she-wolf to the archipelago, jumped into the sea, and was taken up by the island of Delos, which had been floating between two bodies of water for a long time and had no part in the oath which the earth had made not to allow her a safe haven. Beyond the realm. The island therefore suddenly appeared, saved her from destruction, and was honored with the birth of Apollo and Diana. I almost wonder if this realm that we have now is actually called Earth beyond the thing. All like, just this realm, not a sphere or anything, but this particular realm is called Earth. And maybe the beings beyond that are superior in so many different ways, and probably of different species entirely, in powers and everything, wisdom, have all. Maybe this is like the Earth creation story is just more like a story of the founding of this realm. If this place goes on forever, it would take any advanced civilization still some time to find each realm and locate it and find things within it, and see if there's animals or whatever there. And maybe that's what we're getting. Maybe that's what some of these stories are, is just the passing from one, again, the Hyperborean realm down. And that's and then they discovered this place and they named it Earth, and they sealed us in it. Kept us in experiment and tortured us ever since. But here we go. So I'm going to keep going. The floating islands. Okay, yeah. Saved her from destruction, honored with the birth of Apollo and DiNo. If the Iroquois originally descended from these barbarous peoples of which I have spoken, the Greeks must have taken the material of this fable from them, for it could have been held in esteem among the Lycians because they gave a special worship to Apollo, who was therefore given the surname Lycius. Perhaps further research will reveal that this fable is based on another symbol of pagan theology. One looks at ancient thought. Paint a tortoise at the feet of Hippocrates. Pausanias 8 says that he saw at Elis a beautiful statue of the Uranian or heavenly Venus, whose feet rested on the back of a tortoise, as well as another statue of the terrestrial Venus, whose feet stood on a trestle. But he admits quite honestly that he did not know the meaning of these mysteries. Plutarch did indeed try to give an explanation, and says that the tortoise, which always carries its house with it, means that women should stay in their houses, since the care of the household is entrusted to them. But it is easy to see that this is a moral idea which Plutarch himself spun out of his own brain, which does not correspond to the times of the first invention of this symbolic theology. For in those times the women did not occupy themselves with spinning within their four poles. Rather, almost all the women of the barbarians worked the earth. They collected wood for fuel and had just as many chores outside the house as their husbands. Perhaps it would be more natural to consider that the ancients wanted to indicate that the god represented by the image of Uranian Venus was the originator of the harmony of the world, represented by the tortoise. The tortoise was a symbol of this harmony, and Apollo's lyre had the same meaning, as I will show in more detail below. Perhaps they also wanted to say that the origin of man, created on earth, was nevertheless divine and descended from heaven beyond the poles. This is all the more probable, since the tortoise, which due to its fertility could be a symbol of reproduction and thus also of the earth and its element, was in the same way as, according to the interpreter of Richter, the frog was a symbol of water, the egg of air, and the snake of fire. The Brahmins have a tradition in the East Indian religion of their god Vishnu probably, who was transformed into a tortoise, and of whom there are many statues in their pagodas. They say the world was gradually thrown into the abyss by the fall of a mountain, whose weight they could not bear, and would have perished without fail if Bitchute, the benevolent god, had not transformed himself into a tortoise and supported it with his back. The Chinese also make a deity out of a flying dragon, which they call the spirit or the shooting angel of the air and mountains, and which is found in their temples painted with the cover of a tortoise shell. They attribute the origin of this dragon to a tortoise and say that it supports the world as if rests entirely on it. Again, we all know of this tortoise symbolism as a joke, as a pop cultural, liberal nonsense joke, like the flat earth. How stupid could these people be to believe anything like this? Meanwhile, the ancients did, and any day of the week I will trust anything I read in an ancient book or from an ancient source compared to someone from any of the space agencies on Earth. I trust these people much more, and I have a feeling you all do too, and I think we should. And again, they always do things on purpose, steering us in the wrong direction with the turtle, but also kind of giving us a little hint. There's episodes of It's Always Sunny. There's episodes of everything. The Terry Pratchett made a movie, and there's a kind of a turtle in that too. It's there. It's there for a reason. That idea is there for a reason, and I hope we get to the bottom of it, because it's, again, highly symbolic to who we are and where we came from. So let's see. Understood it, guys. So the subject of this fable is one and the same throughout, and proves that the tortoise was a symbol of that ancient religion which the peoples, as soon as they no longer understood it, presented in other guise. For this reason, no doubt, the troglodytes had a sacred reverence for tortoises, which they did not dare to eat, and also detested their neighbors, the relanophagi, because they fed on them. The savages also have some knowledge of the flood, which, as reason itself, according to the teaching of faith, leads us to conclude was general, is an event far too special and too remarkable not to be found among all nations. But the different ways in which they relate the preservation of the restorers of the human race are as much mixed with fables as those of the floods of Deucalion and Oxyges. Interesting again. Page 49. One also finds traces of a very ancient creation among some peoples, according to which they persuade themselves that the world, in the same way as it was once flooded by the flood, will be consumed by fire at the end of time and transformed into a complete nothingness. Was that Archaics and Phoenix here? Ovidius has left us a beautiful testimony of this opinion of the ancients in the following lines. He is also remembered in the Fates, Jupiter, before the time. What sea, what earth in the kingdoms of heaven seized? Let it burn and let the mass of the world work. And again, I think there's maybe different methods of reset by different powers beyond the realm. Maybe one of the tribes, nations, empires beyond here uses fire. Maybe the other uses wood, and maybe they were water, and maybe they were competing for who would get this prime real estate known as Earth, because they had conquered all, or have it was next on the roster and on the map, which we would need to see one day, the true map of this beautiful place. So it would blow all of our minds apart in seconds. Hope one day someone finds one. The savages in general are also not unaware that they are strangers in the lands they now inhabit. Interesting. They say that they came from the west, namely from Asia, Tartaria. The Agnian Iroquois, I believe, assure us that they wandered around for a long time under the guidance of a woman named Gehonoriosk. This woman led them all over Northern America and then brought them to the place where the city of Quebec now stands. But when she found the region very uneven and perhaps too uncomfortable because of the cold, I agree, she settled in Agni, whose climate seemed very temperate and the soil suitable for cultivation. She then divided up the land for cultivation and thus laid the foundations for a colony, which has been in existence ever since. This is what the Agnians say about their special origin, for they claim to be somewhat different from the origin of the other 4 Iroquois peoples. They themselves also claim that they are not included under the name of Agonancioni or Gutenbauer, which the others use. The reason is unknown to me. In the meantime, the French do not distinguish them from the other savage nations, and the name Iroquois or Aragonfioni is generally understood to mean 5 different peoples who have different dialects of the same language. They live in the part of New France that lies on the east side of the lakes, where the river St. Lawrence flows through and is bordered by New York and other English and French lands. They are divided into the upper and lower Iroquois. The highest are the Sonontovans, the Goyoguans, and the Onons, Tages. The lowest consist of the Agniers and the Onagers, all of which I've never heard of. These 5 peoples, in spite of their many quarrels arising from jealousy, nevertheless stick together very closely. In order to express their unity the more clearly, they say that they only form one hut or cabin, which we of Iroquois call their cabin. As regards the origin and epoch of migration, the savages give us no particular light. In anticipation of further discoveries, I will undertake a description of their customs according to their general nature, but I will then turn to the analysis, beginning with the discussion of religion. And that is the end of that section that I'm going to read in this video, because again, there's much more to come. I found some really cool things in this in this book, and I'll share the link below and you guys can translate and see what you can find as well. But there's just so many things that don't add up, and in the next video, it talks about kind of like Columbus and people like that, but also the people that came before him. And in one of the takes that they're not sure if it's, authentic. Are we talking about North America or talking about something else? But it's one of the old ancient peoples, and they refer to like they're finding an island, and then they describe it as having all these things and whatnot. And it made me as well think that, to an ancient people that are building massive doors, massive buildings, massive things that are capable of so much, would North America seem like an island? And if you knew of the map in the lands beyond the poles, and you were just coming here from there, and you'd seen the maps of how massive this whole place is, would Americas just appear to be an island? And I think they would. Like, an island to us is something very small. Again, so we're conditioned to think that. But also, an island is, Asia. Every continent is also an island, technically. And so they could probably travel around them faster. They could observe them from above. They could observe them all around faster, maybe sail the coast faster. And so you could get something that to us seems massive, might not have to these people, and we only know them by name. They could be massive, they could be unbelievable. Even Homer could be a giant. All of these people, we don't really know anything. So we have to reverse think, and we have to look for clues, because this book has a lot of clues that have been lost in our time. We live in the most bombarded time of nonsense from every direction about everything, and we have to step out of this zone and go back in time. It's the only way, because we can't continue on the path of thought that they've taught us, because they have steered us in every wrong direction possible. And it must be reversed. And digging into some of those mountains is probably going to be another only way. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a library in some of those old Sri Lankan or Tibetan mountains or Grand Canyons. Anywhere there could be a vault of our true history, and I think that's what needs to be found and where the focus should go, because again, every historian is lost. They're all lost. Everyone is. And so I hope we can discover it someday, whatever the truth is of our origins, because it will help us become who we are destined to be, and it'll help us treat this world the way it should be. And I think we can all learn from that. So, bless you all from artofdino.com. And again, if you all like this and share it or something, if it spreads more than all my other videos that YouTube has just put the kibosh on, then I'll continue with this book. And because there's some really cool stuff that I don't want to keep to myself, but I also don't want to waste my precious time. So, bless you all. Thank you for checking this out. And check out artofdino.com and saveearth.us as well. Bless you all.